to be different, called to be changed. So God, make us different, make us change so we can shine in the darkest places. Shine so they can see your face. Shine and experience your amazing grace. So let us shine.
Good morning. Last week we heard from Scott Ross. He said he had about 50 years of experience behind the pulpit. As of this point, I've been up here probably like 20 seconds. So there's a bit of inexperience. This is my first time, so you'll have to excuse some of the ums that come along. I'm probably going to forget my place once or twice. Just be warned. So I'd been kind of looking for an opportunity to speak up front, and with JJ's sabbatical, it kind of seemed right, and I agreed to do one. And then I completely forgot I was doing one until about 4 weeks ago. I walked into my living room, and my mom was like, yeah, you're doing one in like 4 weeks, which is like, forgot about that. And to make the matter even better, the next 2 weeks, I had finals going on for college, so that was eating up a huge portion of my time. So I pretty much had 2 weeks, start to finish, to do an entire sermon my first time, which is a bit of a daunting task. And I was struggling to find a topic because of my inexperience. So I'm going to take a quick detour, get back to struggling to find a topic, to talk about rhetoric triangle. So the rhetoric triangle is ethos, pathos, and logos. Logos is your appeal to logic, pathos is your appeal to emotion, and then ethos is your appeal to ethics. So it's kind of like the part of a presentation. You have your logical aspect, your emotional aspect, and then you have your ethics. So I want to focus most on the ethics here. So ethos is your appeal to ethics, or in much simpler terms, because that doesn't mean a whole lot to most people, it's your authority or trustworthiness on a topic. And since I'm inexperienced, and most of you have spent more time studying the Bible than I've probably been alive, it means my authority and trustworthiness on a lot of topics is lacking, to say the least. So I was trying to figure out, what do I know and what can I talk about? My mom said to draw on my own experience, and I probably took that just a little bit more literally than she was expecting. So what am I an expert in? Maybe you've guessed it. What am I, let's say, the foremost expert in Pine Grove, and maybe the Minnesota Church of God General Conference overall? And that's robotics. So first thing first, I have sermon notes. Isaiah and Kyle have agreed to hand them out for me. I know for myself, I sometimes struggle to pay attention and can zone out. So I know notes can help. You can follow along with the ones I have printed there. They have blanks, or you can just flip it over if you want just a blank sheet of paper. And I know there's usually something at the end, the back of a bulletin you can also use. So I'm just going to go over briefly an overview of robotics, just to give some background to it all. You have, that I've been a part of, middle school and high school robotics. So each year you're kind of handed a challenge at different times. For middle school, it's early September, and then for high school, it's the start of the new year. And that challenge differs from year to year, but the goal is always the same. You want to score the most points and to win the match. It's usually a 2 minute and 30 second match, and you want to score the most points. And then you're also on alliances while you're there. There's usually 3 days of competition in a row. The first 2 days, you're pretty much grouped with random other alliances or other teams. And then the last day, it's pretty much the beating teams and points and how they've done will select the teams they want on their alliance, and then there's like a playoff match from the top 8 alliances. So just to give some context again, I have a video of like 12 seconds of an actual match to show. There it goes. So this is the game from 3 years ago in high school robotics. So the goal is to pick up those balls and toss them into the center part. And you can tell which team each robot's on, or which alliance, by the bumper color. So those are the big colored things on the bottom of them. And as I was kind of looking through all of this, I found a lot of parallels between robotics and the church that can be drawn and that we can look at and draw lessons from. But I wanted to take a more narrow focus, which is how robots can serve as an example of the church. So, the first thing is the frame. The frame is always the first thing to be made, and it's the base of every robot. So what I mean by that is the first thing to be made, it's the first thing every team builds. Even before the game is released and people know what they're doing, they'll usually build the frame, and it's the base of the robot. Everything else is built upon it, and you can't build anything without the frame already did. So what lessons can we draw from the frame? Let's take a look at what the Bible says. So we're going to look at Luke 6:47 through 49. Luke 6:47 through 49 reads, "Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and acts on them, I will show you whom he is like. He is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid a foundation on the rock. And when the flood occurred and the torrent burst against it, that house could not shake because it had been built well. But the one who has heard and not acted accordingly is like a man who built his house on the ground without any foundation. And the torrent burst against it, and immediately it collapsed, and the ruin of that house was great." So it says our foundation, right? So what is that foundation? If we turn to Isaiah 28:16, which is the Old Testament, it reads, "Therefore, thus says the Lord God, behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a tested stone, a costly cornerstone for the foundation, firmly placed. He who believes in it will not be disturbed." So right here in the Old Testament, it's prophesying about Jesus. So Jesus should be the cornerstone of the church, like the base of it. He's given to us by God. He's the one and only Son. He's the cornerstone of the church, like the frame. But the frame is it's a very important, but it's also not the thing people see most. And as I mentioned before, the very flashy things are the bumpers, which are on the outside of the robot. There it is. They're made out of pool noodles, surprisingly. So on the right-hand side for you, you've got just a picture of a robot, and the things on the bottom, the red ones, are the bumpers. And on the left side, you've got a diagram of how they're constructed. So the blue things in the diagram are pool noodles, so it's kind of facing that way. You've got fabric laid over the top of it, wood backing, and then metal brackets to kind of hold it all together. And that's the bumpers. Every team is required to have them. So the bumpers are the part in the robot that sticks out the most. And it also protects the robots from other things getting stuck. So what I mean by part that sticks out, when you create your frame, you also create what's called a perimeter. And you can't go outside that perimeter. There's pretty much only two exceptions to that. And that's briefly during a match, you can put something outside to pick something up, to do a function or something. But otherwise, it's supposed to stay inside the robot. And you can get penalties if you leave it outside and hit another robot with it. But the other thing that can always stick out is the bumpers. So they're always on the outside of that perimeter, and they're always outside the frame and most of the robot. And so it serves as a protection for the robot from other bots getting stuck on a game piece and you can't move, or even just the walls running into them. So if we're looking at the robot like the church, I think this would represent the armor of God. So let's flip to Ephesians 6:11 through 13. All right. Ephesians 6:11 through 13 reads, "Put on the full armor of God so that you will be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the full armor of God so you will be able to resist in the evil day, and having done everything to stand firm." Give me a sec. So usually when we read this verse, and I didn't read the whole thing just for time's sake, and I'm sure most of you have already heard it before, but this is applied to an individual. But as individuals make up the church, I feel like it also can be applied to the church as a whole. And some people might point out, my father in particular, when he heard this, that the armor of God maybe isn't the best parallel because, armor, tough, metal, bumpers, pool noodles. It's not exactly the toughest thing. My response to that was the United States, when they used to make battleships, their armor would just be straight like metal on metal on metal on metal. It would be like a softer, rubbery material, and then the hard metal, because it would be more effective at stopping things. The same thing can be seen here with the bumper construction. You've got the pool noodle, and if you remember, there was that wood backing on the back of it that would provide that hard armor. There we go. So moving on to a really aspect of the robot, because the bumpers are required, but they're not maybe the most important thing, they're very flashy, is the scoring mechanism. So the primary way you score. There's a few ways you can score during a match, but usually there's one main thing that you're doing. So I've got a video here. There it goes. So that's a prototype from my team. If you remember when I showed the full match video, this is from the same game year, so they're shooting that same object. And that was one of our initial prototypes. So here we've got two different shooter types. On the left side, we've got one that shoots these. They're rings. They're really big. And then on the right side, we have the tennis ball shooter, I'll call it. The tennis balls are essentially the size of basketball, so they're really big ones, but it still feels and is like the consistency of a tennis ball. It's just really big. But they're different shooters, built for different years. So the scorer is the primary way you score. In fact, 80% of your match is pretty much spent only doing that function. And usually years it involves shooting, like you saw with those balls, and then the rings get kind of like flung across the match. But sometimes it involves instead picking up things, like you've got a cone and a cube. 2 years ago, what we did, you had to pick up both of these elements. So it changes. It's different from year to year. And the interesting thing is, not every team comes with the exact same way to accomplish that goal, though. In fact, every team has a different way of doing it. So it's different every year, and each team has a different design. I think the only way they would be the same is if one team like plagiarized another team's design. But even that wouldn't make sense because it's built for a different robot in a different frame. So this is the primary way you score, right? So this can be compared to our primary mission as a church. Let's read Matthew 28, 19 through 20. This is the end of Matthew, and it's the Great Commission. So the last thing Jesus tells his disciples before he ascends into heaven. It reads, "Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you. And lo, I am with you even to the end of the age." I think it's outlined pretty easily there and straightforward. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations. So that should be our goal. We are called to spread the gospel and good news to all the world. Told you I was going to lose my place. So the Great Commission always holds the same. This is our goal, even though the way, form it takes might change. Like I mentioned before, the shooters can be different, and it changes from year to year, but the goal is always to gain the most points and to win the match. The interesting thing is, a lot of different designs can be used, right? In fact, there is something called a turret design, which is one of the more prevalent designs in the past few years in robotics. So the head of the robot, kind of like a tank, swivels in 360 degrees and can shoot in any direction, which is pretty valuable. But other teams, like my team, we use what's called a stationary shooter, and it's just bolted straight to the frame of the robot, and it doesn't move. The thing is, both of these still accomplish the goal, and they still work well. It's just they're done in very different ways, but it's still accomplishing the goal. Same thing with the church. You know, the way we accomplish our goal might change, spreading the gospel to different people. It takes a different method, but it's still the same goal. You've got a lot of different examples of different shooter types up there. They all do different things, but they're still trying to score points. Now, maybe you've noticed, maybe you haven't, I've been kind of avoiding a key part of the robot. So we're going to talk about it now, and that's the drivetrain or the wheels of the robot. I've got two videos for you. The first one is using mecanum wheels. So these are these. They've got angled rollers, and it allows the robot to move side to side as well as front to back. So as you saw there, it can go side to side, but also front to back. It has a lot of advantages from just your standard wheel. And then the next video I've got uses what's called swerve drive. So it does use your standard wheel, but it is kind of like a shopping cart. If you've used those, I'm sure most of you have. The wheels spin 360 degrees, and then it also can drive itself. So it provides for a very fast and versatile movement. It almost glides across the ground. It's very smooth. So, yeah, it is movement, and there's different wheels. So, movement, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. It's how the robot gets around. And then there's different wheels. So, on this next slide, you've got 3 different wheels here. On the 2 sides, we have the mecanum wheels again. So, you've got middle school on the left-hand side, and then high school on the right-hand side. And then the middle, it's kind of small, but that's the swerve drive. So, just your regular wheels, but they can turn. The application here is that wheels are kind of how we reach people, and to spread the gospel. Because in a robotics match, if you're just sitting there, you're not going to score points. You're stationary. The balls aren't going to just fall into your laps. So same thing with the church. We need to be moving to people and accomplishing our goal. We can't just be sitting still. So as times change, though, and technology increases, so does our ability to reach people. So that kind of represents different wheels. So if we go back a few years, 50 years, in high school robotics, mecanum drive and swerve drive, so the 2 I showed a video of, didn't exist. They were foreign concepts. And they just kind of used the same thing you use to drive a car, just your standard turning. But then the mecanum drive came around, and it was what most teams use just because it allows for that side-to-side movement as well as front to back. But then someone developed the swerve drive, and now that's the thing most teams use. It's the thing most teams want to use. So as technology increased, so did their methods. So if we look at swerve drive, let's say social media, it's really easy to reach people, right? It's fast, it's efficient. You can get to people across the ocean in a matter of seconds. Or maybe the mecanum drive is like talking to someone in person. But the swerve drive is not the best in every scenario. I talked a lot about how swerve drive is good, but there's also drawbacks. Mecanum drive only takes 4 motors to run it. The swerve drive takes 8 because you have 2 motors for each wheel. So it's a lot more work. And then also it's a lot harder to control. You have a lot more speed. That also means it's harder to get exactly what you're doing right. So just like social media, it takes a lot more work to manage. I mean, things can go off the rails really quickly if you've been anywhere. And it's also dangerous. Who hasn't tried to download some random bug off the internet overall? I know I have. So it can be dangerous, but it's still effective. But it doesn't mean that the other one isn't a good way to still reach people. So I've hit a lot of the major parts of the robot. So we can take a look at the robot itself overall. So every single robot that is made is different. There's not 2 that are alike out there, because usually they're made to do different things. On the left-hand side, the top left-hand is the robot from a year ago. The bottom left-hand side is the robot from 3 years ago for our team, and then the right-hand side is the robot from 2 years ago. There's a lot of similarities. They kind of look the same a little bit, but they also accomplish very, very different goals, like shooting the ring, placing the cone and the cube, different things. So let's read 1 Corinthians 9:22 through 23. 1 Corinthians 9:22 through 23 reads, and this is just the end of this passage, just for time's sake. To the weak I became weak, so that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, so that I may by all means save some. I do all things for the sake of the gospel, so that I may become a fellow partaker of it. This is Paul writing here about how he reaches people and spreads the gospel. So the robots there are all different, but they use the same parts, interestingly enough, the same motors, the same frame usually, actually, and then just the same parts. So they may be different and they might accomplish different different specific tasks. So they might be spreading the gospel in different ways, but they're still like the same members, so the same members of the church, maybe just used in a slightly different manner, depending on the challenge that they're faced. So we should be adjusting like that, like Paul says in 1 Corinthians. The last thing I want to talk about is alliances. So, as I mentioned before, when I was just doing the brief recap of robotics in general, I mentioned that you're on an alliance with 2 other teams, so 3 teams overall. This, if we're looking at the robot like a church, can represent like churches working together in like a denomination or a conference. Pine Grove is a part of the Minnesota Churches of God General Conference, and overall the Churches of God General Conference. Working together, you can accomplish a lot. You can get a lot more points than you would on your own, but if you're not working together well and you don't communicate, you can easily trip over each other and score less points than you would maybe alone. So, if we're working with other churches like we do, we need to make sure to have clear communication between us and not be getting in each other's way. And we should, because we're all trying to accomplish the same goal here, which is to spread the gospel like we saw before. So we shouldn't get in each other's way. Okay, to recap, you've got the frame, which is the cornerstone, which is Christ Jesus. You've got the bumpers, the armor of God. You've got your scoring mechanism, our primary goal, which is to spread the gospel. Wheels, how we're going to reach people. And then the robots overall change depending on the challenge that they're facing. And then alliances, which I just mentioned. As I've worked on robots for the past few years, God has given me insight into how we can approach the challenge set before us individually, and then as a church or a team, and a denomination or an alliance. Thanks for letting me do this. I might not be the best speaker out there. Hope you all learned a bit, and maybe now I'm not the only expert on robotics.
So let us shine in a world that needs your light, in a world that needs your love.